These hearts were woven of human joys and cares, washed marvelously with sorrow swift to mirth. The years had given them kindness, dawn was theirs, and sunset, and the colors of the earth. These had seen movement and heard music, known slumber and waking, loved, gone proudly friended, felt the quick stir of wonder, sat alone, touched cheeks and furs and flowers, all this ended. Their waters blown by changing winds to laughter, and lit by the rich skies all day, and after, frost with a gesture stays the waves that dance, and wandering loveliness. He leaves a white unbroken glory, a gathered radiance, a width, a shining peace under the night. Memories Retold is a story-rich adventure game set during the tumultuous time of World War I. In the game, you are quickly immersed into the lives of Harry Lambert, a young Canadian war photographer voiced by Elijah Wood, and a German engineer and father named Kurt Waldner, voiced by Sebastian Kopp. The two men find themselves drawn into the war for different reasons. The assumption could be made that their entering into military service is because of a deep burning patriotism, but the reality is that their choices are quite selfish, though selfish for different reasons. Harry is drawn to enlist after meeting the enigmatic Major Barrett at the photography shop he is employed at. Major Barrett needs a war photographer, and noting Harry's affections for the shop owner's daughter Julia, he enthralls Harry with stories of glory and gold, saying that all girls love a uniform, and the surefire way to make Julia his is to join the army. Harry is convinced, signs up, and is eventually assigned as Major Barrett's aide and official photographer. Kurt, on the other hand, we find initially working in the capacity of a Zeppelin engineer in Germany. His life takes a turn when he hears that his son's unit is missing, and that no one has seen them. His son's unit was filled with young men from his small town, and Kurt decides he's going to join the German army as a way to locate his son. And so Kurt and Harry find themselves thrust into war, with their paths destined to intersect. Now, before we get into the game's story itself and discussion, I would like to talk a little bit about the game's background and development. The game was developed by Aardman Animations and Digixart. Aardman Animations may or may not sound familiar to you. They are a British company founded in 1972 by Peter Lord and David Sproxton, and while may not necessarily be known for their involvement in 1111 Memories Retold, you may have heard them in association with popular movies and shows such as Chicken Run, Wallace and Gromit, and Shaun the Sheep. 1111 Memories Retold is Aardman's first ever console game, actually, and I found it fascinating that they were involved. The second developer is Digixart, which is a company based in France that was founded in 2015. They have developed several games including Road 96 and Lost in Harmony. Now, the publisher of the game is Bandai Namco Entertainment Europe. Bandai is a large company that has a large list of published games of every genre. Saying this, we can say that 1111 is a game that has quite a good amount of backing, if you will, and it was developed with quality and design in mind. The style of the game is unique. That is, the almost painterly quality of it, as if you are in a living painting, walking and interacting with things in this other world. And the style, I found, was actually a deliberate choice. It was inspired by Impressionist painters such as Claude Monet, and was born out of an initial desire to utilize the art style that was popular in the early 1910s. The designers felt that the style was a bit too low-poly, to quote, however, and so they settled for a more impressionistic approach, still fulfilling their wish to have a game design based on an art style. Beyond the visual art of this game is the music and voice acting, which were in many ways the centerpiece. The opening theme itself of the game moved me every time I loaded it to play. The composer of the music for 1111 Memories Retold is one Olivier Devier, and I probably butchered his name, so I do apologize. But he is a French video game composer known for his work in the game Vampire, which, sort of a aside here, that's the first and ever game I've ever pre-ordered. And I had never heard of the game or anything like that before. It was something that I decided to do just one day out of the blue. But I have played the game and it's quite good. Anyway, returning to our frame of thought, he composed, the music for the game Vampire, among others, and has been nominated for several awards and even won some in 2013 and 2021. And I would have to say he did a splendid job in his compositions for 1111, and his work blended wonderfully with themes from that time period, while also remaining quite unique and seemed to pull you deeper into the game and as being this sort of living storybook soundtrack. And now to dive into the two voice actors, both of them were absolutely splendid, and both of them actually had quite rich acting careers. And so Harry, our Canadian photographer, was voiced by none other than American actor Elijah Wood, who is arguably best known for his work as Frodo Baggins in the 2001 and 2003 Lord of the Rings trilogy. And how did he become involved with 1111 Memories Retold, you might ask? Well, in an interview with Mr. Wood that Bandai Namco Entertainment America conducted, he stated that he was intrigued by the game due to its art style and story. To quote, "I loved that aspect of it," he stated. "It's not a war game in the traditional sense. To take a different approach and talk about the humanity of war, that really has nothing to do with holding a gun, was just interesting to me." Indeed, if I might say, that was in many ways the reason that attracted me to playing the game myself. The art style of the game was something I'd never seen before, and unlike many war games of today that seem to be focused entirely on battle royale, move as fast as possible, kill as many people as you can, and explosions and blood and gore sort of games, it was refreshing to see one focusing on, I guess you could say, the real aspect of war, the real tragedy, the humanity of it all. Now, Kurt, our German engineer, is voiced by Sebastian Koch, a German television and film actor. Now, I'm not very well read or studied in the German film industry, but from what I could find and see, he has done a lot of fabulous work. See here, in his early career he did theater, actually, and was lauded for his work in movies. And in more recent times, he apparently also lends his talent to audiobook readings. And I highly recommend you check out some of his films. From seeing clips of them and so forth, he seems to be a stunning actor with a talent of really bringing characters to life. And now what's quite interesting is that apparently all of this, the game itself, development, art, partnership, all of it stemmed from a chance meeting of the two developers when they were at a convention in 2016 called Games for Change, and the rest is history. And I just want to say that the reason we sort of dove into the history behind the game, if you will, is that I find it interesting to look into games a bit further than just the surface story, beyond just the game itself and my playing of it. Knowing how and why a piece of art created is sometimes as exciting or as interesting as the art itself. And so before we dive into the discussion of the story, I would also like to note that I am going to be talking about the story in full, including focusing on the endings, and will include many spoilers. There are several endings, several different choices in the game, but I will be discussing the game as I personally played through once before. So we will dive briefly into the gameplay and face of the game itself, and then sort of go into the main focus of the discussion that I want to do. Now, I personally played this game on PC via the Steam application. I believe I purchased it at the time when it was for sale, but at the time of this recording, the game is listed for $29.99 or $30. I played the game for a little over 6 hours, it says here, which may sound short, but while I was playing it, I felt like it was much longer, honestly. I was actually quite surprised when I saw my total time and saw that it was less than what I thought. And see, regarding the game controls, you probably saw me struggling a little bit in my Part 1 playthrough. They took some getting used to. I stared at the control settings page for quite a while, and the biggest issue that I personally had, and I'm also not the smartest tool, see, I can't even say the the nomenclature correctly. I'm not the smartest person out there, so maybe it was just me struggling with it, but I stared at the control settings page for a while, and when the scene changes happened, the controls would sometimes seem to change. Some different keystrokes seemed to send you someplace else, and the characters would go places I didn't want them to go. But other than that, and the learning curve for me as being sometimes feeling like a not the most intelligent person in the room, I would say that the game was relatively simple and easy to play, very much story-oriented. Now that we've said our piece there, we will now dive into our discussion. Harry and Kurt. Two men thrust together by fate, the pigeon and the cat. And the choice of implementing the pigeon and the cat as these sort of foils to each other, and these symbols related to Harry and Kurt was very interesting to me. Now, why was Harry associated with the pigeon, while Kurt the cat? In some ways, I think the pigeon was a foreshadowing of Harry's aerial escape in a more, direct symbol, while also being a symbol of innocence, freedom, and loyalty. It was a homing pigeon, and a messenger pigeon after all, and I think in the end it represented Harry's desire to return home, while also alluding to his future choice. Now for Kurt, what could the cat symbolize? Cats are predators, and many times we saw the cat trying to pounce upon the pigeon. Was it a nod to Kurt as the enemy, a predator? A symbol of the claws that existed within Kurt, ready to be exposed, sharp and slashing, representing, perhaps, his eventual snap and rush to confront Major Barrett, and even kill him? Was the cat's chase of the pigeon a representation of Kurt, chasing his son, chasing innocence and the symbol of memories of his son as a boy and not a soldier? That is where my mind, at least, went, but either way, I found that sort of play on symbolism fascinating between the two. Now, Harry as a character is quite interesting and tragic in some ways. He's a young man, practically a boy, a simple young man with a crush on his boss's beautiful daughter, a woman who, maybe he felt, didn't take him very seriously as a potential romantic partner, but we can see their relationship grow through letters and pictures that Harry sends to depending on what you tell her and what pictures you send, per the game mechanics. But Harry's sole purpose for joining was to impress her. But as he begins to experience the real tragedy of war, he changes. His Indian friend, who is shot dead in the middle of merriment, watching the decline of Major Barrett's mental health, the dead and dying and burning, the trenches and crashed aircraft and shattered landscapes, the starving German soldiers, all of it terrible things for anyone to witness, let alone a young man barely out of his teen years. And even though he does change in some ways, he seems to have this sole focus, this burning passion to return home, to return to Julia. Beyond that, Harry, despite seeing the things that he does, Harry remains Harry. He's young and has maturing to do, as we all do at his age, but even after witnessing the death of friends and seeing the horrors of gas and fire and bullet, he is still kind. We see this with his Indian friend. We see this in how Harry interacts with everyone around him. We see this in his ready willingness to bring food and water to prisoners, and his shock and horror at hearing the crack of a gunshot as Major Barrett executes them. He brings chocolate to starving German soldiers and a little girl. He collects apples for a sick little girl, Kurt's daughter. He nurses a pigeon back to health, and he treats an enemy, a German soldier, with kindness and friendship. Harry is young, and Harry is innocent in many ways, and that innocence and humanity is quite a foil to Kurt. Now, Kurt is older than Harry. In an interview, his voice actor mentions that Kurt is 45 years old. Kurt is a father, an engineer, a farmer, who has lived a good amount of time and seen much. We see in the beginning that Kurt is a smart man who cares about the quality of his work and about his fellow neighbors and villagers. He is kind as well, and those around him speak to him with respect and empathy. His wife loves him dearly, and so does his daughter. A good man, a good father, and a good engineer. He harbors no bloodlust towards the enemy. If anything, the war just seems to make him tired. He just wants all of the German boys, the sons, the fathers, the brothers, to come home. Now, his catalyst, though, is his son's disappearance. And while his son's disappearance sort of changes something within him, and the war definitely does something to hasten that, Kurt is still fundamentally kind. He finds friends in the German army and helps them. He brings supplies when asked, does his job. Feels for the broken and the dead he finds on the battlefield, whether they are German or otherwise. He runs through gas to find a gas mask for a fellow soldier. He protects and hides and feeds and looks after Harry in many situations, helping him escape certain death or capture and welcoming into his home when Harry's luck eventually runs out. Instead of killing the young Canadian outright when they are trapped underground, Kurt is thankful to him and open-minded. All evidence points to Kurt being a truly good man, a kind man as Harry is. But he doesn't quite have that spark of young innocence that Harry does, that his son does, or had once. Instead, bitterness and anger and hatred slowly start to build within him. Everything else that he is slowly overshadowed and buried by that hatred and anger, until it all comes to a head. Somehow Kurt's family finds Harry's photos, and one of the photos is of Major Barrett holding a gun to a German soldier's head. And that German soldier is Max, Kurt's own son. And so Kurt sets off on a mad and rage-pained quest for revenge against the man in the photo, the man who was holding a gun to Max's head. I found it odd, at least personally for me at this point, that Harry couldn't tell him whether Max was dead or not. Perhaps it was because of the language barrier, but I feel that Harry would have known that the soldier that Major Barrett held a gun to and subsequently heard a gunshot after seeing would have been killed, or at least information would have spread about camp and he could have known. But regardless, Kurt disappears, truly, having disappeared physically, going off to find Major Barrett, but Kurt disappears. The kind man and father who cared nothing of war and killing and just wanted his son back is replaced by a creature of anger and pain and hatred. Now Catherine, Kurt's wife, turns to Harry for help, begging him to save her husband, and even gives him Kurt's old hunting rifle and helps him with the balloon that Kurt built for him to escape. While Kurt stalks Major Barrett and finds him at a house by the beach, drinking his life away while lamenting about the war, Harry floats over battlefields and stormed before we reach the second-to-last climactic choice. And at that moment, floating in the air facing a storm, Harry has two choices presented to him. He could follow Major Barrett's orders that he received in a final letter to him, telling him to go home to his girl and forget about the war. Or he could listen to Catherine's pleas and go after Kurt, trying to find him on his quest for revenge and helping out a friend. What does he do? Julia or Kurt? And now from this point on, there are 7 different endings that this game presents to you. 2 endings involve you leaving Kurt and heading home to Julia. They are called the Lone Avenger and Forgiven endings. Strangely, the Forgiven ending is considered the good ending, but I personally do not see it that way, and we will talk about that a little later. For perspective, the Lone Avenger ending leaves Kurt to face Major Barrett alone, and after a brief and angry back and forth, Kurt shoots and kills Barrett and then is killed by a squad on the beach that was watching their interaction. He is bitter and angry in his last letter to Catherine, written as he lays dying, leaving her a widow and his daughter fatherless, and meanwhile Harry goes home, marries Julia, and has a son. In the Forgiven ending, though they do not understand each other's language, Kurt eventually lowers his gun and is taken prisoner instead of shooting Barrett. Kurt sits in prison but is eventually able to go home. Harry and Julia get married and have a son, and of note here, Harry is telling his son the story of how he and his mother got married and the son came to be, and the son asks, "Do you think of the German soldier?" And Harry replies, "Every day." Again, I have my thoughts about this ending and whether or not it is truly the good ending, but we'll move along. Let's see, now the next few endings all stem from choosing to follow Kurt. I won't try to go into too much detail about these endings, but I want to give a brief synopsis so that we can have a discussion baseline here. So the other endings are called Sacrifice, Grudge, Betrayal, Revenge, and Peace. In the Sacrifice ending, Harry ends up shooting Major Barrett, and both he and Kurt die on the beach after the Major's squad opens fire on them. In Grudge, Harry tries to get Kurt to stand down, but this makes Kurt feel betrayed by Harry, his friend, and eventually Kurt actually shoots Harry and is subsequently killed himself. Of note for this ending, at one point Major Barrett says during the altercation, "Why don't you two hurry up and shoot each other and save my men the hassle?" And of note in Kurt's dialogue at the end, he tells his wife in his death letter that Harry was worse than Barrett. Harry thinks only of Julia and of the life they could have had together. In Betrayal, Harry shoots Kurt and kills him. Harry ends up decorated for heroism and returns home to Julia and is married. Kurt dies on the beach, agonizing over how he should have never trusted Harry. And this ending in particular I despise. In Revenge, Kurt asks Harry to kill Barrett. Barrett tells Kurt, "You think you're special just because you lost a son?" Kurt kills Barrett, and Kurt is then shot by Barrett's men on the beach. Harry goes home a mocked traitor, while Kurt feels that his task has been finished. And now we talk about the ending that I chose, and the ending that I personally think is the good ending, or the best ending, and I'll tell you why.
I made up my mind. I had a friend, and he needed my help. I wanted to help Kurt, but for all I knew, he'd kill me. So I let the pigeon go. I wasn't far away now, and the bird had found Kurt before. I hoped she would again. But first, I had to land, and I hadn't thought that far ahead. I survived, and I thought I'd heard gunshots. I had no idea if Kurt was nearby. But if he'd found Barrett, he wouldn't be safe. I had to hurry.
Hiding is not one of your strengths, I see. What was your plan, just out of interest? You come here, you find me. What then? You don't even speak English. What were you planning to do? Well. Harry? Harry Lambert? What the hell are you doing here, Harry?
Kurt, I can explain everything.
Harry? Was machst du denn hier? Huh?
I came here to save him. I'm so sorry, sir.
Ich will antworten, Barrett. Antworten! Was hast du mit meinem Sohn gemacht? Sprich! Was hast du mit ihm gemacht? Antworte mir! Jesus Christ, Harry! Who the hell are you fighting for?
Please, sir, just tell us. Did you kill that prisoner back in Vinny?
I don't know what he wants. He's crazy. Na komm! Bring ihn zum Reden, Harry.
No, he's not crazy. He's a father.
Oh, du erinnerst dich an ihn. Ja, du hast ihm eine Waffe an den Kopf gehalten. Wie ich dir jetzt meine Waffe an den Kopf halte, das war mein Sohn. Come on, Fritz. We've all lost someone we care about. It's war.
Did you kill that prisoner back in Vinny?
I don't remember, Harry. What's the German for probably? Ich muss wissen, was mit meinem Sohn passiert ist. Mit meinem Sohn. Mit Max. Hörst du? Max. Mein Sohn. Look behind you, Fritz. I've got far more guns than you have.
Don't do this. Tell him his son's alive, sir, and we can all go home.
Var mein Junge! We've all lost people we love. All of us. Fehlt mir.
So, that was it. The Major never forgave me. I lost everything. They called me a traitor, a Fritz lover, a yellow. They still do.
They spared me, Katrin, but I still wonder if I should have killed Barrett. It's a burden I will have to live with. What happened to Max goes unpunished.
Word spread, even here back home. Taylor won't let me back in the store. Julia won't speak to me.
No doubt they will praise him for his heroism. But, Katrin, we know the truth. We know who he really is. They will not keep me for much longer. Please tell Lucy I'm sorry. I will be home soon.
We gotta understand. I couldn't shoot him. He was my friend.
But you've got to understand, I couldn't shoot him. He was my friend. He was my friend. What a phrase. He was my friend. And indeed, Harry and Kurt were friends. And what an interesting friendship it was. There they were, sworn enemies, German and Canadian, fighting each other, their countries at war, their own countrymen having killed much of the others. And yet even here friendship blossomed. When they were trapped in the trenches beneath tons of mud and dirt and rock, wondering how they were going to survive, they found companionship and a willingness to survive for their own reasons, and saw no need to kill each other, especially after Harry saved Kurt's life. Now, I chose the option to save Kurt, even though Harry's dialogue afterwards indicated that he didn't save Kurt on purpose, was that he was trying to get out of the way of the falling debris and instead hit Kurt. But I believe that, since I chose the option, he fully intended to save Kurt. So Harry saves Kurt, and then Kurt saves Harry, and they work together to survive. And then throughout the rest of the game, they do little things that end up helping each other. There was one portion where Kurt distracted a sniper so that Harry could get through. He also distracted and helped Harry attempt to escape the church at one point, but it just wasn't Harry's good fortune that day. Harry, on his part, had the pigeon who brought the plans to Kurt, who turned off the gas, and all these little things that they did that sort of helped each other out without realizing it. And indeed they were friends when Harry showed up on Kurt's doorstep, and Kurt welcomed him into his home, allowed him to be on the same property as his wife and his young daughter, and Harry became a friend to them as well, helping with chores and cooking and cleaning. Harry wasn't just this random soldier in a chance encounter. He and Kurt truly were friends, bonded by something deeper than just meeting on the street if they were both German or both Canadian, bonded by war and a shared sense of humanity. And that is why for the forgiven ending, I had such an issue with that one being the alleged good ending. In the Forgiven ending, as I mentioned before, Harry decides to go home to Julia, leaving Kurt to his own devices. And then Kurt confronts Major Barrett, and they have their chat on the beach, if you will. And Kurt goes to prison and goes back to his family. And Harry stays with Julia and gets married, and they have a son. And Harry mentions to his son that, yes, I think of the German every day, but that's felt so hollow to me personally. When you look at the depth of friendship and the depth of circumstances that Harry and Kurt went through together, being trapped in the trenches during an attack and helping each other to escape, and Kurt going so far as to build the very balloon that Harry used in the Forgiven ending, at least, to go home to Julia. It felt as if that ending just fell so flat to me, personally. Because what was the point then? Yes, they were friends, but Harry just left him there. Even though Catherine had begged him to do something, gave him Kurt's old hunting rifle and the balloon and helped him go save her husband. Yes, Harry could sit there and say, oh yes, I think of the German every day, but for what Kurt did for him to simply just leave and go to Julia, for me that just felt very flat and very selfish of Harry. And so what I liked the most about this ending, the ending that I chose, and I don't like that one particular dialogue where Harry tells Major Barrett, just tell him that his son is alive. I don't really feel that that is actually something Harry would say at that point. I think I chose wrong, but for the most part, that felt more realistic and more impactful to me personally. The fact that after all is said and done, yes, Harry is this young man, he's in love with Julia, and all he wants to do is to go home and be with Julia and marry her and have this life. But at the same time, he thinks of Kurt and of Catherine and, his daughter Lucy. And Kurt is his friend. The things they went through together, that is not just something that you can wipe away. This bond of friendship is something that is so deep and so wonderful. And for me, at least I feel, something that Harry, as a good man, not just a boy, but a good man, he could not just let his friend face Major Barrett on his own and perhaps be killed and leave Catherine and Lucy without their father after they've already lost their son. And so I chose to pursue Kurt, and also with that, not to help Kurt kill Major Barrett, but to try to reconcile, to have Kurt stand down and to keep Major Barrett from killing him, because I have no love for Major Barrett. If you see any of the other endings, I chose not to put them in here, I described them briefly, but he says some rather nasty things to both Harry and to Kurt, and in this ending he seems slightly more benign than those endings, but even still, Major Barrett has shown that he doesn't really care. He says, it's war, we've lost people, but that is just a justification in the end for his own actions and his own brutality towards his own men and towards those of the enemy. And meanwhile, here comes Harry, to be with Kurt, to stand by his friend's side, as his friend had stood by him before, and to help him, to mediate, to ensure that his friend will survive until the moment of peace so that he can go home to his own family. And, in the end, Harry suffers for it. He does go home. He gets to go home. But Major Barrett doesn't forgive him for turning his rifle on him. He doesn't forgive Harry, that is, Major Barrett doesn't forgive Harry, for standing up for his friend, for a German, an enemy. And so Harry goes home a pariah. Everything is left of him. Julia won't see him. His boss won't even let him into the shop. Everyone looks at him as though he were a leper almost. He bears a mark of dishonor. But then at the very end you see what he says, but you've got to understand I couldn't shoot him. He was my friend. And therein lies, well, I guess I should say here that I seem to have a favorite trope, and part of that is not necessarily the golden endings. There's typically a bit of sacrifice in my favorite endings, but what I find so poetic about this is that it just feels the most impactful, as I've said, because Harry gives up the life that he wanted. He gives up his marriage with Julia and potential children with her and coming home a war hero to help someone else. It is a selfless act, a sacrificial act for someone that he called friend. And even though, especially in that day and age, they may never see one another again, that bond of friendship will remain. And though Harry comes back home and realizes that he is a pariah, that no one wants to be around him, and that he's viewed as a coward, a yellow, a German lover, or whatever, he can rest assured, at least deep in his heart, that he did the right thing, and that forever the rest of his life there won't be this shadow of regret hovering over him, always wondering what became of Kurt, what became of the German that he became friends with. And it will be tough for him, but he will be able to live through it because he knows that in the end, though he lost everything, he did the right thing. And on Kurt's side, he says, he wonders, maybe I should have killed Major Barrett, but I think Harry showing up in that moment to be with him demonstrated to him that there are more important things than his own revenge and anger. And I actually started crying a little bit at the end when I first played this game, when you get to the moment where Kurt just finally falls and the gun lowers and he just says in this broken voice, I miss him. And you are seeing the revenge for what it truly is, this anger on Kurt's part at not being able to protect his son, at not being able to be there for him, of not being able to see him again. This son who was with him on the farm, who he raised, who he was so proud of, was just gone, and killed in such a horrible way too, in a way that was memorialized in a picture. And I don't know any parent who would not get at least a little bit angry at seeing a picture where an enemy or some Broche man is holding a gun to their son or daughter's head. So Kurt's anger is justifiable, but then here comes Harry, sort of this reminder of this innocence, of this steadfastness, of this friendship, of the opportunity of there being something beyond Kurt's rampant anger and rage. And I think because Harry was able to be there in that moment and stand by Kurt, facing this man who took his son from him, Kurt was able to find peace with the fact that his son is gone, and he is able to stand down, something he would not have been able to do necessarily without Henry, I think. And in the, quote, best ending, Harry isn't there and they both stand down, but again it just felt empty, because in the end Kurt still is filled with bitterness and melancholy, and it just didn't feel right. I think Harry being there was the best catalyst for Kurt to be reminded, to be supported that he's not alone, I guess, in a sense. And so that's sort of my favorite trope in a game like this, particularly in a game where it's supposed to be talking about the humanity. I find that the good ending, as it is quoted, to be quite selfish on Harry's part, and on the part of Major Barrett, who, at least in the quote good ending, seems to show some sort of remorse. He really doesn't. Throughout the game, he laments about how he sent all these men off to die and how terribly he feels, and then the instant Kurt is there, he does a complete 180 to where suddenly he's this vicious major again. And so he only cares about the men who died, the people who died, when they are his own men, when they are British or Canadian or what have you. But if you're a Jerry, then you are subhuman, you don't matter. And yet here is Harry, a foil to that, who does care because he has seen throughout the game. He helped the starving German soldiers. He helped the soldiers who were injured by gas. He helped the starving German girl, because Harry understands that the war is terrible and brutal, but that in the end all of them are human. And that is why I think it is such an important thing for Harry to be there with Kurt, not as a Canadian standing with him against, the Major, but as a man, as a friend, as another man standing next to him and saying, I am with you, I understand your pain, let me help you, in his own way. And so that is the ending that I chose, and the reasoning why is, even though it may seem sort of bitter, I think in the end it is the most poetic one and the best one, in my opinion, personally. So, but 1111 Memories Retold was a very good game, a very unique one as well. I did very much enjoy how it felt like you were walking through this living storybook, playing out the story for yourself. You really become connected with these characters and become immersed in this point in time. And the game was beautifully poetic, it was beautiful physically, the painterly style and the cinematics were very well done as well. And it's, when you look at the history behind the game and how it came to be, and the big names that were a part of it, Elijah Wood, Aardman Studios, and so forth, it's kind of interesting me that we haven't seen more of it. And personally, if a movie was ever made of this story, I would definitely go watch it. But the ending that I chose, I think, is the one that makes the most sense. And I always have something for the trope of friendship, true friendship, not even necessarily this romance, but this deep bond of humanity that I think sometimes gets overlooked for, these sort of romance stories, when just the bond of friendship can be even deeper or more meaningful. And I think we saw this here with 1111 Memories Retold, and Harry's choice to help his friend who had helped him so much, even at the cost of the future that he dreamed of. So if you've played 1111 Memories Retold before, and you have some thoughts about it, I'm very curious. What did you think about the ending that I chose? What did you think about the, quote, good ending? Do you agree with me and think that maybe one ending was better than the other? Did you choose a different ending that you thought fit the story a bit better? What did you think of the game? And having seen my playthrough and my sort of strange twittering running on review, are you curious about playing this game yourself? Have you played it? Please, if you have any thoughts, do let me know. I'm always very curious to hear what other people think. And so without further ado, that was 1111 Memories Retold. I do hope all of you have enjoyed the playthrough and my video here, and I hope you also have a lovely rest of your week. We're about, where are we? We're in August now, so the year is running by quickly. So I hope you have a lovely rest of your week and a wonderful day. Pax vobiscum. Goodbye.